Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Gevertz, the Chief Privacy Officer at Visa, and I'm joined by my dear friend, Michelle Dennedy. And I think we're good. This is billed as a fireside chat. I will note that I am in my attic and I'm using a headset because we've got snow on the roof, and every time it heats up a little bit, starts crashing off the roof. So it's not feeling that much like a fireside chat, but hopefully we will engage in some thoughtful discussion for the next 45 minutes with you all. And please feel free to use the chat feature and provide us with some questions. We're here to talk about how do we demonstrate value of privacy. And I think what I want to do is to tee it up with Michelle and talk about three questions. Who do we want to demonstrate the value of privacy to? What is the value that we want to demonstrate? And how do we do it? I think those are very fundamental. And I think I'll just start, Michelle, and talk a little bit about the who and let you take it from there.
Excellent.
Because the way I look at it is in any organization, one of the places you're starting is your internal constituency. You've got to demonstrate the value of privacy, why it's important as an organizational imperative to your management and to your employees, because everybody has a part in, certainly in a data company, in fulfilling the mission of respecting consumer privacy, respecting the data that we handle. And as we get into things and talk about privacy by design and other ways we work on building privacy, everybody's got to buy into that. So that's one of the core places that you obviously have to demonstrate value. I think you also have to demonstrate value, obviously, to your clients, whether they are B2B clients or consumers. At the end of the day, obviously, the privacy values are those that you have to pay most attention to, are those of the individual consumers, because it's their data. And how do you engage with them and show them that what you are doing with their data is respectful of their personal information? And certainly, you know, and especially as we talk in a forum like this today, we're talking about how we demonstrate the value of privacy to our investors, our shareholders, or other investors. I'll stop for a minute and turn back to you, Michelle, and see if you want to add on that topic.
Yeah, so I'll add from a couple of different perspectives. You know, first of all, for those whom I've not met and hopefully will meet after the pandemic is done, I'm Michelle Dennedy. In my present form, I am both a consultant practicing the wicked craft of wicked privacy, and we'll get into what that means in a bit. And we've just come out of stealth with, I'm the CEO of Zen Data Privacy, and it's a markup company and a source level shift left for developing. And in my past life, I've been the CPO at a whole bunch of different places: Sun Microsystems, McAfee Intel, Cisco. I've done sales. I've been in public policy. I've been a CEO of an analytics company. So I've really approached the who from pretty much every direction you could think. And John's exactly right. When you're thinking about providing value, documenting value, and driving and accelerating value, thinking about not just one monolithic, what is valuable about privacy, but really what are the careabouts for each of your constituents. For Zen Data Privacy, we really want to empower developers. We want to go to the heart of where the problem has gone wrong. For my clients over at Provatus, we really are working with C-suite and columnar teams so that we get a unifying agreement across businesses about what they care about. Your CFO can say the words, yes, of course I care about privacy, John, but what they're really reporting in their professional life is the balance sheet. So the question for you, anytime you look at the who, is what are their careabouts? And how do you figure out, how do you have a unified marker to aim at, and then metrics that matter to each one of the constituents, so that ultimately the consumer, the user, the employee, the data subject, they own the data, but they are not necessarily the most powerful curators and fiduciaries of that data. And that curative value, the ability to be a true fiduciary, means you've got to somehow find a way to document, improve, and create metrics that create motion going forward. So I think whenever you think about the who, think about many different constituents, and then it helps us get deeper into the question of what is valuable and what is value in this space.
I think that's a great introduction, Michelle, and really appreciate it. I think when we start thinking about the what, we've known that people say that they're very interested in the privacy of their data, especially as they give up more and more of it because we collect more and more data about individuals. But sometimes it's a very amorphous concept. So I think you're exactly right when you talk about, how do we measure it? What are the metrics? We all know that people care about breaches. We hear about that. What goes wrong is a huge indicator of privacy concern. But we also need to be able to measure what goes right, because we want to demonstrate that the value of maintaining, of using, of sharing data is something that provides value to consumers. Not only the downside issue of the breach, but how are we creating value, and how do we develop the taxonomy, the nomenclature to describe that value in ways that are perhaps more meaningful than the notices and consents that we've all grown up with, that many people, including privacy professionals, sometimes don't read. I've asked the question in a different setting about, how many people, don't read the notices that they click on. And then I asked the question, how many people who write those notices don't read them either? And I think, as we move forward, and I know we've done some research, I'll let you talk about some of the research that you've been involved with about how you measure real interaction with data on the part of the consumer and their ability to recognize and appreciate how you're using that data.
Yeah, I think I just want to emphasize this point. Because I think in the past, and I'll say up to now, up until this moment even, particularly in the privacy and often in the security world, the analogy is kind of like, I think it's deeply unpleasant to get punched in the face. Some people are boxers, so there's a slim margin of people that, this is part of their thing. And so our entire practice has been about, hey, we prevent face punching. That face punching? We hate that face punching. Don't you hate getting punched in the face? We're going to lessen the blow of the face punch. And the question isn't like, why would I even put myself in the arena where this might even happen to me? You're not talking about what I really wanted to do was to walk down a city street and go shopping without getting mugged. I don't want to focus on the without getting mugged. I want to be a shopper. So I think in tilting the privacy value community experience, instead of having this fatalistic, nihilistic view that you can't have privacy because technically we can enable all sorts of observations. Instead, I think we focus on the ability to shop online, the ability to be resilient in a pandemic, and have these pictures of ourselves broadcast around the world to continue moving forward with our intellectual and our commercial and our cultural ideals. And so when you're providing goods or services, whether you think you're a digitally transformed company and you haven't recognized that you have been digitally transformed, or you're a traditional data company like Visa was one of the original cloud computing companies in the world, you realize that it was never the prevention of face punching that made Visa great. It was the ability to demonstrate that you are credit worthy, that you can exchange this information for goods and services, and then the merchant would know that you would pay them, and you didn't have to walk around and create greater risk and inconvenience by carrying around stacks of currency. And so as we start focusing on business objectives, I think we're going to start to understand first, why this is valuable to business and not just de-risking. That's sort of the production rise of privacy tech, of de-risking the already existent risk. And then the shift left that says, before you put things into production, when you want to look across the technology stack and not an answer, it's a technology stack. And the reason for that is you're going to actually match your techniques and your value models to those business objectives, rather than just saying face punching bad, fines bad, breaches bad. Of course they're bad, but I do still share my information with you and right now with Hopin, because I want to communicate, because I want this industry to truly rise up and technology tools to match that burgeoning marketplace. Sorry, a bit of a soapbox, but I don't like face punching.
It's a great metaphor, and I want to drill deeper with you on one of the areas of shifting left, because I think it's so important. You know, shifting left is right. It's privacy by design. It's building it in, not bolting it on. And you know, I've been doing this long enough that I was asked in a prior role once, you know, hey, we're rolling out a product next week. Are there privacy and security things we need to think about?
So cute, right? Like, would you ever say like, hey, dude, we're going to be rolling out this product. It's going to be online. What operating system should we pick? And it's Tuesday.
Exactly.
Absurd.
And I think one of the things that you were talking about in terms of shifting left, and some of the questions that I'm seeing that are popping in from folks that are listening, are about teeing off on something that I said about notice and consent not always working incredibly well. And it certainly, you know, it doesn't necessarily work well for some of the traditional areas. We know it doesn't work well as we think about the fact that everything that we interact with is a sensor in the Internet of Things. It doesn't work real well in the ad tech space. There's just so many areas that the concept of notice and consent don't work that well. I think one of the areas where we do want to demonstrate respect for the consumer and therefore value is building in the user experience, building in UX early on in the ideating, and that's part of what I think of as shift left or privacy by design.
Yeah, I mean, before you can design it, you have to conceive of it. So I think it's even starting at a very, very early stage with every business initiative. And I'm saying business, but of course it translates into governmental activities and even family planning of, you know, vacations or financial planning. If you don't have a goal in mind, so let's take privacy into the home for a moment. My context is I've got kids in college and about to be in college. It's a very different context and financial importance and imperative than when I was a young single person having paid off my law school debts. My maneuverability professionally, the amount of risk I could take, the transfer of moving from New York City out here to Silicon Valley, these choices are contextual choices because there was a financial incentive, a personal incentive, etc. Now, as the context shifts and I do my financial planning, I don't plan my finances in the same way I planned my finances that supported that lifestyle in the past. We shouldn't think that privacy is a one and done, and you can somehow have a checklist compliance version that says the data that I needed in 2019 to predict shopping behaviors is the same data that I'm going to need in 2021 after the world has gone crazy. So figuring out what is your context, what is your data appetite is as important as budget. And I will sometimes say, because I'm a little bit biased, maybe even pre-budget. If you're going to be spending a great initiative on building stores, on building out mobility, on changing business, on repackaging all of this digital tsunami of data that's come in from your workers all working from home and all over the world, if you're going to capitalize on that data before you spend a penny, I want you to sit down and understand what is your data appetite for risk and what is the ROI that you expect to get out of those data-driven businesses. And then you're going to start to really see yourself accelerate through that process and design better things and manage better things.
if we're not going to use, right, notice and consent, or at least we're going to decide that notice and consent has its place, but it's a limited place in this
It's
day and age.
adorable.
What are some of the things that we do use? And I know we've done some research, you know, and right, Visa is a B2B business primarily with a B2C brand, but a B2B business. But as we work with a lot of other entities, one of the things that we look at is, can we build out consumer control panels? And there are a lot of companies that are doing nice jobs with that. Some who are doing excellent jobs, some who are, I think, doing, fair jobs. But how do we
Being
develop the
kind.
right taxonomy so that we are providing toggles or other switches that are easy to digest? So your choices that you're making when you are sharing data are quite clear, are transparent, are articulated not on page 45 of a privacy notice, but are up front. And to your point, Michelle, some of those things change over time, right? You were commenting, and I think it was a great analogy about how your interests and your needs have changed over time. How long, what purposes are you giving somebody your data for, and how long might they have it? Do you go back to them and ask them again after some period? Do you reconfirm those choices? Those are things that I think is important for us to all be thinking about.
And can that be automated? I mean, something as simple as saying, hey, it's been a year. Are you still interested in these things? I think not only is that a means of checking the box of consent, if that's one of the things you're relying on to have the opportunity to be the fiduciary of that data, but it also is a beautiful time to talk to your customers and enhance that inherent relationship that data can bring. I wanted to see, and I don't know how publicly you want to be on this, John, because I know you've done such a wonderful job, particularly across the C-suite, gathering together data stakeholders across your business. Could you go into that a little bit? Because I think that is a fascinating and unfortunately quite rare practice.
Hopefully it's not that rare, but I will talk a little bit about what we've done internally at Visa. We've done a couple things in that regard. We have a data use council now that evaluates, new uses of data. I'm a lawyer. I have a team of lawyers. We can evaluate the legality of doing something, but the uses of data, I think, are need to be evaluated through multiple lenses, and you've got to get the right stakeholders at the table to evaluate that. Is it good for your clients? Will they want it? Will they be happy? So you need to have people in that discussion that interact daily, that are with those clients. Is it good in the case of Visa? Is it good for our merchant clients as well as our bank clients? So you need to have those kind of folks at the table as well. And if everybody still thinks it's good for clients, is it something that we want to do from a brand standpoint? Is it something that we want to be involved in? So you want to have those people involved. And then finally, and when I say finally, not lastly, perhaps firstly,
In
is it
addition,
the right thing to do? Not only should you do it, not only can you do it, but should you do it? And bringing an ethical lens to the conversation of what you're doing with data. Is it the right thing to do for consumers? Is it the right thing to do for the company? Is it the right thing to do for society? And I think, I'm going to stop with that, turn it back to you, but I think one of the areas that we look at, not only in that respect, is as we talk about corporate social responsibility, the folks that are involved in that are increasingly looking at privacy and data values as a metric that's important to them. And this is, I think, a relatively new dimension that we have only really seen in the last couple of years, but I think it's one that's gaining a lot of traction, as well it should.
yeah, I mean, John, you know how passionate I am about this, because I think, and if you actually, Brian Lee, who's my partner at Provatus, has done some research on all of the job listings that are out there in the privacy category, and we're segmenting into technologists and lawyers and accountancy people and value drivers and chief data officers, which I love. I think we need that disparate talent set to really get, as you said, to this data council sort of notion. But I think it's really important that the number one consideration, every single job thing, whether it's for a lawyer, engineer, whoever, is communication. Communication northward to the board and across to your teammates so that everyone actually knows what to do in a data governance ongoing problem. It's an infinite issue and opportunity. I won't call it a problem, but you're always going to have privacy issues. And when you fix one thing, like having better identity management, you create another issue, like having better identities on the table. And so you have to learn how to manage and governance these things as an interlocking system. Now, what that does, I think, sets us up very much as it did for currency traders. And that's a big leap. So let's unpack. When you talk about exchanging, and I'm not just talking blockchain and Bitcoin and stuff, I'm talking about regular old, how do we value things in a marketplace? And one of the things we do is we exchange on the margins. So this market is up, and so we're going to buy cheap and sell, buy low, sell high, that kind of thing, right? So as you talk about the privacy value chain growing, I think a couple things are really exciting to me. Is if you invest money in, say, identity or in anonymization or data segmentation, there's a mathematical term called a Markov change, where you have a stochastic reference where one influences the next. So if you've invested in identity, then you have a higher probability of having more room to have greater data use properties. And if you have greater data use properties, you probably can have a variety of mix in products. So on this goes, and you can see it can be almost infinite in complexity, but as you make incremental changes in one part of the system, you have to be aware of the technical system, but also the soft system, all of our carbon-based units causing all the risk. And I think where that's bubbling up at the board is one way, which is the ESG number, environmental, social, and governance. So you see a lot of security people at least being requested at the board level of public companies. I still haven't seen any privacy officers sitting on those boards yet, but they're coming. And I think the more we put value calculations on the values that we hold dear in ethical, respectful, trusting relationships with our personal data, whether it's a consumer or an employee, I think that ESG number actually takes some risk off the table on the downside of the balance sheet. So as you invest in building the tech and understand that every time you're building something, there's some sort of metric that you can gather. It doesn't have to be a causative metric to be good. Ice cream doesn't usually cause summer, and yet in normal summers, you buy more cream when the weather starts getting warmer, and you can have a good business predictor. When you have a better curated set of data elements about human beings, and your business is providing stuff to those people, you can see where makes a logical relationship to brand, to ESG. And then one more that I've just learned about, which I think is really important, particularly for this community of innovators. The venture community has been very stingy and very stodgy in the privacy world. I'll just say it flat out. Anyone who's here, you're not the ones I'm talking about. There's other people saying there's no business in privacy. First of all, that's bollocks. Sorry to my UK people who think that's a swear word still. But secondly, if you actually do the research, and I read this article, and it's a number called The Civic, and I don't know what the whole acronym is, but it stands for the impact metric. And you're seeing this more in like green technologies and sustainable technologies. And it's from Bucknell Capital, worked with MoFo to come up with a metric that actually says to venture capitalists that your portfolio companies have to demonstrate a certain level of impact, and you can decide what that impact is. And if they don't achieve that, if there aren't privacy enhancing technologies coming out, if there aren't consumers being bought on, if there aren't changes at the board level with metrics, then that portion of money goes back to some sort of a not-for-profit or educational institution. I think it's a really great incentive. And no surprise, the article I was reading, the gentleman who created the civic metric went to the other VCs and they all said, oh, heck no, I'm not giving a piece of my carry away. But when he went to the institutional investors, when he went to the family funds that are feeding the venture money, that's feeding the rise of privacy technology, they all said, oh, yes, we want to be a part of no more disinformation, higher morality, higher demonstration of truth, and more privacy. So I think it's an exciting time for metrics at the board level, at the VC level. It's time to be held accountable.
I think those are great points, and you drove deeply into a number of areas. I'm gonna.
Sorry.
No, I am more simplistic in some respects, and I think a lot of what you were talking about is for any company to be able to understand the data that it has, to be able to use data. I think a fundamental precept is having some governance around that data. And I'm not talking about a lot of hoops to jump through. I'm talking about firmly understanding the data life cycle, understanding what you collect, how you use it, how you store it, how you share it, how long you retain it, and the interactions with that data. And I think as you talked about some of the privacy enhancing technologies, which are so helpful for discovering data, for pseudonymizing or anonymizing or just in general depersonalizing data in some respects, so it can be used while maintaining that respect. So free the data, liberate the data, be able to use it to derive value, to derive the ROI that you were talking about, but do it in a way that is respectful of the individual whose data that you're talking about.
It sounds so simple, but even data discovery I think it's a great place to like wave the red flag in front of innovators. How do we do that? How do we get there? I see thoughts happening, John.
Yeah, no, you know what I was thinking about is we've talked about demonstrating privacy value. We've talked about respecting the data. We've talked about interactions with consumers. We've talked about internal governance. We have not once in this conversation, I think is one of the great things about this conversation, used the compliance word. We haven't talked about, that we have to, that we have such a myriad of privacy laws that we are dealing with right now. And I think that part of the value proposition, obviously, is complying with those laws and staying current. But I think I think part of what's motivating my thoughts, perhaps yours as well, is that the challenge of dealing with, well, GDPR is less than 3 years old, and it was a brand new stake in the ground. But we're now seeing, right, we see CCPA in California, but we're already seeing CPRA in California. We're seeing new developments all over the world. I was looking at a study just the other day that says something like 2/3 of the world's population, Gartner is predicting, will be covered by GDPR-like legislation within the next 2 years. That's a phenomenal change from where we were just when we got to 3 years ago, less than 3 years ago, as I said, when GDPR. And I think, for me at least, one of the reasons why we're spending this time talking about the data and the governance of that data is if we spend time focusing in on the nuances of complying with each of these laws that we have to do.
Right.
And we do it, we definitely do it. But if we focus on checkbox compliance, and I think you did mention that much earlier in our conversation, then you're missing the boat. You're missing the boat on demonstrating value to all of those constituencies that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I think not only are you missing the boat, but as you've said, John, about 2 years' time, 2/3 of the planet are going to be covered by a similar set of rather specific rules and regulations. They will have their local nuance, but 2/3 of the planet in 2 years. Anyone who has spent any amount of time with our tech brothers and sisters can tell you it takes a long time to change gears in the back end. Even with this highly change, it feels like you can jump from hypercloud to hypercloud and have multi-clouds and have bada. No, to have a strategy that really is comprehensive, where you can go back to like John, like you said, like, where is my data? To answer that question and continually answer that question day by day as data is moving like currency between and amongst your partners, stakeholders, shareholders, and the globe, you have to invest on the infrastructure. You have to invest and make the case that if we want to serve 2/3 of the world's population as our prospective client base, including our suppliers. So even if you feel like you have quite a niche supply of customers, you do very high specialty, helicopter, makeovers, I don't know. Even if so, you're probably dealing with currency markets around the world. You're probably dealing with suppliers of physical goods around the world. And you're definitely talking about global media. So in that context, I will posit that you're actually making an ROI investment that may not pay off this quarter because there's a law coming into effect. And what's the likelihood that I'm going to go to court, which is the old way we assessed value, by fear. It doesn't matter if they don't drag you into court if you can't serve 2/3 of the world's population.
It's a great point. And, I think in the privacy community, we spent a lot of time, some did and continue to do, talking about those GDPR fines. All of a sudden you're thinking about, small fines. Then you start talking about, fines of 4% of annual turnover, which can be very large numbers. But we're seeing limited cases of that. And I think even if we were seeing larger cases of that, it's going to catch the outliers.
Yeah.
And how do we, if we spend our time talking about that, then we're not spending our time talking about the true ROI that you were talking about.
Exactly. And as Carrie's pointing out in the comments, if you can't have access to that data, if you can't share across geographies because you've not built in respect and measures that can demonstrate trust in your operations and organizations, then you're losing. And it doesn't matter how big the fine is, you're losing, and you're going to lose not just market share, but you're going to lose any talent that's going to want to be attracted to your business over time. And it sounds like we're getting back into that fear and uncertainty language. But I think the upside of that, you're not going to is if you do plan for data respect and resiliency, if you are able to find where that data is it permissioned? Is it proportionate to the needs? Have you minimized your data to the greatest extent? We will stop looking at data as if it's some sort of exhaust fume and really start looking at it as the driver that's going to pull us out of this pandemic period, certainly, and it's going to be the basis of a new society where people actually are curating their personal stories more than ever before in human history.
You mentioned a little while ago the room in these areas of using data, of collecting data, of maintaining data, room for investment in technology, right? We've seen a lot, especially for those of us that have spent time at, for example, when we used to physically go to conferences, when you could go to RSA, which I believe was the last time I was in San Francisco. Now that I think about it, was last February. When you went to conference, a ton of money, a ton of solutions in the security space.
Yes.
We've talked a little bit And I'd like to drill, we've got a couple minutes left, maybe drill a little bit further into some of the opportunities in the privacy space for those enhancing technologies. Is it, when we talk about finding the data and being able to determine where it is, what can we do that's beyond, say, glorified DLP solutions?
Yeah.
That really get to the bottom of finding data. And then, I think the other area that you talked about, right, was, de-identification and how we do that better.
Yeah, I think looking at this as a supply chain is really important to me. Now, obviously, someone's personal history and data and story, which is what I say is that kind of cloud of value around a data subject, starts well before they start interacting with your company. But let's hypothetically put the consumer in the center of this for a moment. If what we have now, we have a set of data under, I think, the false principle that storage is cheap. So you just dump everything into the data center and you become this crazy data hoarder. That is our reality. That is our legacy right now. I think figuring out what are the technologies that help me sift through today's reality, that's where you're finding these sort of glorified DLP solutions where you're saying, hunt for PII or serve my DSAR request. These are important activities, but they're only a piece of your stack. When I think about things like de-identification and even data certification of packages, of data sets, so that you can actually accelerate their use, because you're going to either say, this has been cleaned or segmented or reduced so that it only means X thing, or it only has been permissioned by Y set of people, and you have more fidelity, whether it's got personal data in it or whether you're filtering out what you perceive as personal data. Always tricky. There's no proof. There's no silver bullet, but this becomes a really important tool in the production set. There are other technologies that we all know and love that are doing really well in the marketplace. Thank you, because they're incenting VCs to want to have a market here, and they're creating reports. And the reports are important too, because you want to communicate. But the closer you get your segmentation, understanding the quality of the people that are permitted to touch this precious, precious data. Did you know that to become a developer, you have to cross no standards? All you have to do is know how to code. To be a teller in a bank, to be a notary public, you have to pass tests. There are routines, there are penalties for getting it wrong. So I think the shift left is, what are we doing for the poor people who are building this stuff in the first place? So we'll talk a little bit, you'll hear Howard and Christy later today talking about the Zen data privacy stuff, which is specifically for developers. But I think every stage of development, QA, the quality people who have been invested for over 50 years in understanding what is good data, and that may be statistically relevant for their good, and what data is causing us risk. It may be geographical, it may be non-permissioned. We may have a different set of things that we can put into the quality discussion. And then in production, are we going back to that important customer and saying, after we've spent all this time playing with our tech toys, is this something that's good for you? Are your requirements, are your needs being met? And if they are, how important are they to numbers like brand? Brand is a feeling. Brand is nothing more than an emotion. And I'll bring it back to the case, I actually mentioned this in an earlier session today. Think about the Volvo brand. I'm a child of the 70s. It's now 40 years later. And I still think in my mind, when I hear the word Volvo, what do you think of, John? We'll do a test. Volvo.
Stable.
Stable, the mom car, safety. Sorry to any Volvo people who think you're selling sports cars. If you do, I don't know about them. But they have gotten an unfair advantage over something so important to car buyers across the world. They looked not at the cool sports muscle car, they looked at the moms who had the spending ability. And what do they care about? They care about their kids in the back seat. And so for 40 years, They invested not just in an advertising campaign, but in this idea in the minds of their consumers that Volvo is somehow safer than the competitive brand. Imagine 40 years from now, if we were able to say, the reason I use Visa is because they protect my data. This data about my financial life is my lifeline. If my Visa stops working, I don't get my groceries right now. I can't continue to pay my bills, on and on and on and on. It's a cataclysmic failure in my life if that little string that John's company has granted to me no longer means anything to the merchants with whom I want to share it.
Yeah, well, and to wrap up, because I'm getting the hook signal here, is that I hope that's not 40 years from now only. I hope it's today, tomorrow, and 40 years from now, because I think, you know, brand is, as you say, it's critically important. The last thing that I'll just tie up with is we talked, you know, because it was picking up on something you just said. We had talked at the very beginning of this about the various constituencies, and you talked about developers, for example. And I think it's so critically important for any of us that are in data companies that we provide not only the training and the awareness, but the incentive that people feel motivated, that they know that they are entrusted with something that is of value. Personal information of others is a valuable commodity. It's not a commodity. It is a valuable resource. It is a commodity as well, but it's valued and it needs to be treated with respect.
I want to say that, you know, along with this value that we've recognized, it's a value to a human being. We're looking at the market size and mix. And in 2019, IDC was calculating approximately an $800 million marketplace for privacy technology, specifically privacy tech. I'm sure there's a little security stuff sneaking in there hither and yon, but this really is for the governance segment of the marketplace. Now that we've seen what's happened with the investment and with the calculations, we've got a couple of unicorns, billion-dollar privacy tech companies out there in the marketplace. I predict that when IDC comes out with its new report, even after a financial cataclysm of the last 2020 year hot mess dumpster fire, we're going to find that marketplace for privacy tech is probably looking at a total addressable market of well over $1 billion, well over $1 billion. So it's good money to invest now. You're looking at very young Amazon, you're looking at very young Microsoft, you're looking at very young Visa. It's time to invest in our brands because we building some things up in here.
And with that, I know we're out of time. Thank you so much, Michelle, and thanks everybody for listening to us. Really appreciate it. Take care and enjoy the rest of Data Privacy Week as it's now turned into.
Woo!